So is it time to hit the panic button out in Boston, or are people just being a little bit too reactionary? Despite starting the season in the first 26 games with a record of 21-5 and just statistically across the board looking overwhelmingly dominant, over the past month of basketball, it hasn't looked so great as the Celtics have found themselves with a 500 record of 8-8, which of course kind of just led me down this rabbit hole of trying to figure out what's going on with the Celtics, and something that I thought was going to be easily answered and explained became significantly more convoluted and complex, and had me looking at way more Boston Celtics games than I ever thought I was going to be able to do so. Now, why exactly do I say this? Well, looking at the numbers on the surface, despite the fact that the Celtics do have a record of 8-8 over the past month of basketball, statistically across the board, there's nothing really that kind of just yells out mediocre or average team. Over the last month of basketball, the Boston Celtics have an offensive rating of 117, a defensive rating of 110, which is top 10 in both categories, which has then resulted in a net rating of 7.1, which is tied for a top 5 net rating in the past month of basketball. And effectively, when Boston is winning games in the past month, they are beating the brakes out of teams, which may be slightly inflating a lot of these numbers across the board. Like on December 21st, when they beat Chicago by 25 points, December 27th, they beat Indiana by 37. On New Year's Eve, they beat Toronto by a whopping 54 points. On the 3rd, they beat Houston by 23. The 7th, they beat Denver by 12. And recently, they beat the Orlando Magic by 27 points. So yeah, when you're winning games by that significant of a margin, the numbers may be slightly inflated. And because of this, I had to do a little bit more digging into my research to try to figure out what's going on, because the numbers are just not going to tell me on the surface. And what I found are 3 major concerns that Boston is dealing with. Now, the first major concern is that Boston is just going through a shooting slump right now. Over the past 16 games, they're shooting 34% from behind the arc. And just in a general sense, throughout the totality of the season, this is the worst three-point shooting season we've seen from Boston over the past 2 years. And of course, as we know, the three-point shot is taking up a huge shot selection of what Boston is producing on a game-to-game basis. And so if they're having a bad shooting night, then of course they're going to struggle to compete with a bunch of other teams in the NBA. But when they are making their threes, then they have the ability to just smoke teams out by significant margins. And a lot of those wins that I talked about earlier kind of correlate with them just having much better shooting nights, which then kind of course begs the question on how much dependent should the Boston Celtics be on their three-point shooting, which has been an ongoing question and concern that many people have had over the past 2 to 3 years. In my humble opinion, I don't really think it's that big of a deal. Sure, there are a couple of shots that we can all nitpick here and there throughout the course of this last 16 games where they shouldn't attempt a three-point shot. They should just get something a little bit easier. But I mean, you could argue that's for practically every team in the NBA. Second issue is their defense. And I think this is slightly a bit more concerning. Over the past couple of years, the C's have been known for having that switchable defense that makes it extremely difficult for opposing teams to create advantages, not only at an individual level, but from the team at large. However, this season, it doesn't seem as if like that same level of intensity, care, and attention is really being given to a lot of these players when it comes to the Celtics. Now, this isn't just like a 1 or 2 player problem. I am starting to see a lot of questionable decisions that are being made defensively from practically every position and every player on this court. Both Derek White and Jrue Holiday just don't have the same fervor defensively on ball, and even some of the rotations are kind of late. Then when it comes to Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum, their rotations are a bit overly ambitious to the point where they're just leaving players open. And I do believe some of this stuff can be cleaned up, but I've seen a lot of these be pretty consistent patterns, not just in his past 16 games, but even early on this year. Now, to be fair to the 4 players that I just highlighted, I do believe it is a bit unfair to ask them to be consistently locked in and motivated defensively throughout an 82-game season when you've been making consistently deep postseason runs over the past 4 to 5 years and you just won a championship. But with that being said, what I do believe is a bit more concerning defensively is Al Horford, Porzingis, and Peyton Pritchard. Peyton Pritchard is receiving more minutes, and a lot of it has to do with what he provides offensively, in particular with his three-point shooting, especially for a team that, again, has their ups and downs from behind the arc. But he gives up a lot, and I do mean a lot on the defensive side of the floor, as a lot of teams start to just target him. Great example of this is what Tyrese Maxey did on Christmas Day. I mean, it was pretty consistent how quickly Tyrese Maxey was able to just, Peyton Pritchard, all right, bet, say less. Come on over here, my boy, and let's get this going. And he was cooking on Peyton Pritchard, regardless of on ball, off ball. He was just outspeeding him pretty often. The other two, Al Horford and Porzingis, is where it is starting to be a bit undeniable. I think Al Horford over the past like 2 to 3 years has been grossly underrated as a defender. Not saying he should make an all defensive team, but taking into consideration his age and what this team is asking of him, I think he has exceeded expectations by a fairly wide margin. But this year, it seems like some of those miles are catching up. Now, again, I don't want to be too critical on him because he is older and you're on a team that has made consistent deep postseason runs. Hopefully, by the time we get to the playoffs, things change a little bit, but you can definitely start to see the age and regression from Al Horford. Certainly more flat-footed, doesn't have that same lateral quickness, but again, expected. But Porzingis, boy, is it bad. There is really nothing pointing to the fact that Porzingis is a really good to great defender like he once was before. If anything, there's a lot of things that point into the opposite. When he's on the floor over the past 16 and really throughout the course of the season, the Celtics that have great net ratings across the board, regardless of the sample size, they're actually losing the minutes in which Porzingis is on the floor. And then defensively, Kristaps is very flat-footed. He's not rotating over. He looks a little bit lost out there. He doesn't necessarily know if he's playing drop or he's trying to come up and help. And even when they do play drop, because of just how slow he is, it still is easier for ball handling guards to kind of just get around him and still get to the basket. Very concerning. And I honestly don't know how much of that is really going to change because they need Porzingis on the floor. Offensively, he still does a lot of things really, really well. But what really put Boston over the top and made them a true title contending team and came across as unstoppable is this theory of when Porzingis is on the floor, you still are able to play at a really high level offensively while keeping the constant rotation of backline help, rim protection that has a flexibility to kind of step out here and now and then on the defensive side of the floor. And they're just missing that. There have been moments where Porzingis has not only looked like the weakest link defensively, but once more teams are attacking him, they are going at him in drop coverage. They're finding ways to get him involved and he's just not able to keep up. And in all honesty, this is a team that has proven that they don't really have to rely on Porzingis and his presence on the floor because they made a whole deep postseason run and won a championship while he didn't play too many games in the playoffs. But we all know the difference between the Celtics with or without Porzingis when he's playing at a certain level is a really great title contending team to a all-time great, one of the best teams we've ever seen of all time. That's the difference in their ceiling. You have the Cavaliers who are in the Eastern Conference who are playing at that type of a level, and it does kind of leave you questioning like, hey, last year it was a bit of a difference. A lot of injuries was going on. Now, though, if everyone is healthy in the Eastern Conference, in particular the Cavs, if you aren't able to play at that all-time high, all-around dominant level, then things can get a little bit more interesting, and I do believe that Porzingis could be the key to kind of changing a lot of that for the Boston Celtics. But the biggest problem that I don't think actually will be resolved is Jaylen Brown. Let's go on and get the cat right out the bag. Let me be clear about this as well. Jason Tatum hasn't been the greatest. This season certainly hasn't looked that great for Tatum either, so I don't want to make it seem like I'm removing all responsibility off of him, but I do not want anybody to run from this conversation because it needs to be had, especially with a lot of the dialogue that is being wasted in the NBA community, in the ethosphere over the past 5 to 6 months about how good Jaylen Brown is. He won a finals MVP. We now got to put respect on his name and put him in conversations when we don't need to do that because Jaylen Brown has never been that caliber of player. And if you ever thought that he was that caliber of player, this year should undeniably prove it. Undeniably. Because so far this season, Jaylen Brown is averaging 23 points, 6 rebounds, about 5 assists, but turning the ball over nearly 3 times a game, only shooting 45% from the field, 32% from behind the arc, and 76% from the free throw line. And you may be wondering, well, how bad are those numbers? Well, it's the lowest 3-point percentage of his career. He's having the lowest 2-point percentage of his career since 2018, the lowest effective field goal percentage since his rookie season, and the 3rd worst true shooting percentage that we've seen out of his career. And of course, over the past month of basketball where the Celtics are 8-8, the stretch that we're referring to, the numbers still are really bad for Jaylen Brown, especially his 3-point percentage where it's dropped even further, actually below 30% over the past month, so that's even bad. And some of these accuracy numbers still don't do it any justice because when you dig a little bit deeper into what's going on with JB, basically if he's not finishing at the basket, he's just not getting anything to go down at all. Again, over the past month of basketball in the restricted area, 65 to 66%, pretty respectable, but in the paint non-restricted area, only 43%. On his middies, he's only converting those at a 26% clip, which is crazy. Left corner threes, only 33%. Right corner threes, 57%, but he's only attempting 7 of those. And above of the break threes, he's only making those 22% of the time, and that is an overwhelmingly large portion of where his three-point shots are coming from. That's really, really, really bad. And even the on-off numbers really point to the lack of impact from Brown over the past month as well. And to be fair, take some of these on-off numbers with a grain of salt. You know, you can't look at them from surface level. You gotta watch a little bit more games, but when they're this far removed from what the team average is, it's kind of scary. So just as a reminder, when Jaylen Brown is on the floor, they have an offensive rating of 115, defensive rating of 113, which gives them a net rating of roughly around 2. But when Jaylen Brown is off the floor, their offensive rating is nearly 120, defensive rating is nearly 101, which gives them a net rating of 19. To put those numbers into context, in the past month, having a net rating of only 1.7 when you're on the floor is the third worst net rating of everyone on the team, only following Sam Hauser and Porzingis. But when he's off the floor, having a net rating of 19.3, that is the best net rating of any player on this team when they are off the floor. So I did my due diligence. I watched a lot of footage in some games, and I immediately came to the conclusion I already knew what was going on, and that is Jaylen Brown, he's just not that guy. The thing that many people need to understand is that there is a difference between someone who is generating offense, creating opportunities not only for themselves and everyone else, and capitalizing off of that, which in turn makes everyone better, in contrast to someone who is receiving the benefit of said player existing. Meaning that there are some players who are just finishing plays while other players are creating plays and opportunities for everyone else, and sometimes also having the responsibility to create for themselves as well. Jaylen Brown is not that. Now, this does not mean that Jaylen Brown has not improved with his passing. That's 100% true. However, Jaylen Brown, in a general sense, if you ask him to operate in a pick and roll, if you're asking him to operate in isolation, which this season, the Celtics have been much more liberal with allowing Jaylen Brown to do so, the frequency is the highest that we've seen out of him in his entire career, to the point where pick and roll ball handling duties and isolation duties make up a third of the possessions that Jaylen Brown is involved in, and yet he is undeniably terrible at it, producing only 0.88 points per possession on isolation and 0.83 points per possession while being a pick and roll ball handler. And in all honesty, those numbers don't even do it justice. It's one thing if you're Anthony Edwards and you're trying to struggle, to trying to create opportunities for yourself and everyone else when you're sharing a floor with Rudy Gobert, Jaden McDaniels, and Julius Randle, right? That's difficult. But when you see someone have ample floor spacing, no one really around him, he's just trying to get off one-on-one, and he's still struggling to create these opportunities, it's hard to watch. Why are you forcing this? Why are you trying to get these looks off when you know you can't do it? That's not your body, nigga. That's not your body. And when people are having these conversations about Jaylen Brown, I hope that they do their due diligence and watch what he is doing this season, because it is undeniably clear. Jaylen Brown just isn't that guy. And that has been undeniably a part of why Boston hasn't felt as overwhelmingly dominant that they did last year. That cannot be fixed. But yo, let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. Do you think Boston should panic? Do you think they should make a move, right? And do you think that the Cavs and OKC, because how dominant they've been, they've kind of closed the gap on them and really kind of present some concerns heading into the postseason? I think that part is true, but at the end of the day, Boston's going to be the best team in the Eastern Conference. I still think they're better than Cleveland in a 7-game series. But hey, those are my thoughts. Please let me know yours in the comment section below. Make sure you hit the subscribe button, notification bell, and until next time, I'll see you all later. Peace.